Hello, everyone. This is Hiba, and today we're going to learn about information theory. The reason I'm doing this session in a series of such sessions is that I aim to study information theory, and how I will study is by teaching you, the audience. This way, hopefully, both of us will learn. I feel like I learn more when I teach rather than just by myself. So that's why you can also use this to when you're reading in the book, if you're reading this book by chance, then you can go through this YouTube video so that maybe this will help you understand some things. You'll feel like you are not alone. If I didn't understand something while I was going through this, then you're also not alone in not understanding it, which will give you some sort of comfort. Okay, now, the reason why I am trying to learn information theory is the following. As a communication engineer, I have a lot of friends that are information theorists. It's just inevitable. So every time we meet up in a meeting or whatsoever, they start talking and everything they say just flies over my head. So I feel like I really need to know what they're talking about. It's just like they're talking in a different language and I need to know that language. So that's why I'm doing this, like I'm starting this journey into learning information theory, and I hope that you continue this journey with me. So this is a book that I chose because it talks about the fundamentals of information theory, which is, I guess, a beginner course. I think it relies on some assumption that you are an electrical engineer or computer engineer. So if you're not, then I hope that this doesn't really pose much of a difference. You can always learn a new topic without having the right background, as long as you have the passion for that topic. So this is Information Theory, Inference, and Learning Algorithms by David Mackay. Let's start. Okay, let's see the contents. This is the contents. Hopefully we'll be finishing all of this one day. But let's begin with the introduction. This is the introduction to information theory. Okay, so this is senior undergrads and grad students. All right, let's just jump over all of this. All right, so let's begin. Introduction to information theory. The fundamental problem of communication is that of reproducing at one point either exactly or approximately a message selected at another point. All right, so we're talking about a point here. Oops, let me just start commenting. Right, so there's a point A, and I'm just gonna denote it by this X, and we're trying to, and so from this point A, we send a message, which I'm gonna call M. We're trying to get this message in another point, we're calling it point B, and we are seeing, do we get the same message? Do we get this message back? And if not, approximately the same message, which we denote by hat over the M. So this is approximately the same message for all intended purposes. And this is, who said this? Claude Shannon, 1948. Now, if you don't know Claude Shannon is the father of information theory. He created, or he wrote, a mathematical theory of communication in 19, or I don't know when he published it, I think in 1948, where he laid down the foundations for information theory. I tried to read this, but it's not an easy read, although it looks easy compared to most papers these days in communication theory. or information theory. But it's not because it has a lot of foundation things that you have to go through. So if your foundation itself is not that great, then this doesn't really help you at that point. I'm guessing this book will be more understandable because there are exercises that aims for the student to understand. This just says things as is. So I think after we just understand this book, then we can go on and read this paper and see and like understand more about information theory. Okay, so in the first half of the book, we study how to measure information content, how to compress data. This is important. Compression is really how we live every day, how we get HD videos streamed on our laptops whenever we open Netflix or on our televisions, how we get HD videos and from YouTube and all that. This is done by compression. We learn how to communicate perfectly over imperfect communication channels. And now we get to the bottom of the reality of information theory and what's it trying to help. So what's the last problem? How can we achieve, that's point 1.1, the first lesson, perfect communication over an imperfect, noisy communication channel. Now, what's an imperfect communication channel first? Imperfect is talking about whenever you're sending a signal. So I'm gonna see T here, and T is our transmitter, and we are sending into T bits. Okay, so bits which are zeros or ones, something like that. A stream of bits gets sent here, but then it's sent over a channel, which I'm going to denote by C, and then it's received. And that's basically point A and point B again. And hopefully we get the same stream of bits back. So should get something like that. All right. Now this path between the transmitter and the receiver can be imperfect. And what does it mean by its imperfection? You transmit with a certain power. These bits have a certain power, but over distance, this power degrades, and so what you get here is not what you originally got from here. So that's one way that the signal gets attenuated. Another way, you send at certain time from here, but it will get received somewhat delayed in the receiver because of different paths or some other phenomenon. And so that's another imperfection from the channel. What about noisy? That's not the same thing. Noisy is talking about you have a certain transmitted message, these bits, but from the channel, you have some noise added to it. So it's a signal. Noise is a signal, but it's an unwanted signal. Any unwanted signal can be thought of as noise that's added to your transmitted signal. This could really destroy your transmitted signal. The receiver will not be able perhaps to differentiate between noise and your transmitted signal. And that's why noisy channels are like, if you have very high noise, then what can you do? Now let's talk about examples of noisy communication channels. You have an analog telephone line over which two modems communicate digital information. So this is a phone line. This is a wired medium. That's important to note here. And you can get noise from here because of thermal noise, something to do with the electrical circuits that gets heated up and things get lost that way, bits get lost or flipped or some other error occurs. The radio communication link from Galileo, the Jupiter orbiting spacecraft, to Earth. Now, this is a wireless medium. And now this travels through space like a vacuum from Galileo, Jupiter, to Earth, and it's puny, this transmitter Galileo. It's very, very small transmitter with a very diminished power compared to radiation coming from all around space to Earth. So how would you be able to differentiate signals that you want from the unwanted signals, which are just the radiation and space, which is considered noise? Now, reproducing cells in which the daughter's cell DNA contains information from the parent cell. That's really interesting. So we can think of communication in biology also. This information theory has it's starting to have roots in biology, and that's very, very important to consider, just to add these two fields or create a new field, biological information theory. That's something I feel like in the future will be huge. Parent cell divides into daughter cells, two daughter cells. That's mitosis or meiosis or whatever the process is. Um, so what happens? In here, we get a division of an original parent cell. The DNA gets copied to these two cells. Now, this copying could be done with errors, and if that happens, then it may lead to something called cancer cells, which is obviously not some result that we'd want. So here, error-free communication seems to be perhaps the most important out of these examples. Life or death happens because of this error. A disk drive. A disk drive is an interesting way to think about communication, because in here, what they say here, communication doesn't have to involve information going from one place to another. It can talk about information at one time from another. Like you want to store this information and read it at a later time. So what happens when we actually store a file on your computer? You just click save, and then one day later, if you want to open it a day later, you want to have it be recovered exactly as it was saved. But what happens if you save it and somehow the disk drive is corrupted? What it does, it just corrupts your file. You can't recover it back. And that's communication. Now let's look back at this quote. The fundamental problem of communication is that of reproducing at one point either exactly or approximately a message selected at another point. Cloud Shannon didn't make a mistake here when he said one point. He didn't say at one place, he said one point. And that point, not necessarily is it a point in space from, but it could be a point in time. And in here, it's just fascinating. Okay. So what are something common about these different channels? All these channels are noisy. A telephone line suffers from crosstalk with other lines. So if you have lines that are grouped together, there could be interference if they're too close to each other. The deep space network that listens to Galileo's puny transmitter receives background radiation. That's just the unwanted signals coming from the cosmic sources. DNA is subject to mutations and damage. A disk drive, which writes a binary digit, a 1 or 0, also known as a bit, so a bit is a 1 or 0, what it does is aligns a patch of magnetic material in one or two orientations. Okay, that's quite interesting. May later fail to read out the stored binary digit. The patch of material might spontaneously flip magnetization, or a glitch of background noise might cause the reading circuit to report the wrong value for the binary digit, or the writing head might not induce magnetization in the first place because of interference from neighboring bits. Now, what's flip? A flip is an error, okay? A flip is an error. And we're talking about bits, so how is a flip an error? Well, if we want to store zero, but somehow it gets stored as a 1, that's a flip, so that's an error. And let's say we store 1, but somehow it flips to a 0, and that's another error. Okay, so what do we want? Like, what is communication trying to do? We want to have a communication channel that the probability of error is zero. The probability of error that you don't have flipped bits is zero. You don't want that to ever happen. But that's not really that realistic. It's not practical to say that. We can say instead, it's so close to zero, this probability of error, that for practical purposes, it's indistinguishable from zero. And now this is more realistic. And this is what information theory is trying to do. Okay, so now let's consider a noisy disk drive that transmits each bit correctly with probability 1 minus f and incorrectly with probability f. All right, so the probability that the bit is correct, the transmitted bit is correct, is 1 minus f. It's just a number. The probability of bits being incorrect is f. So just to sanity check, f plus 1 minus f gives you 1, which covers all the sets of events. This model communication channel is known as a binary symmetric channel. Let's look at it. It's here. It looks like this. It's binary symmetric. First of all, because it's binary, you send only 2 bits, 0 or 1. It's symmetric because you can flip it. I mean, 1 minus f is the probability that you get a 0 if you send a 0. Same thing for 1. If you send a 1, you get 1 minus f. But if you flip it, it's also the same probabilities of error for both zeros or 1s. Okay, now let's look at this. What is this saying? The probability that you receive, so y is what we receive, okay? X is what we transmit. The probability that we receive a y given that we receive a 0 given that we sent a 0 should be 1 minus f, which we just talked about here. This is a correct sending because you receive 0 given and you send 0. Now the probability that you receive 0 but you actually send 1, that's a failure, right? Something happened. So that's the probability of f. It equals f because that's incorrect transmission. There's another type of incorrect transmission where you have the probability that we receive a 1 given that we sent a 0, which is again f. And then the probability that we receive a 1 given that we send a 1, which is a correct transmission, it's 1 minus f. Okay, now what's the solution? The physical solution is to improve the physical characteristics of the communication channel to reduce its error probability. We could improve our disk drive by using more reliable components in its circuitry, evacuating the air so to eliminate turbulence, using a larger magnetic patch to represent each bit, or using higher power signals or cooling circuitry in order to reduce thermal noise. But these physical modifications typically increase the cost of communication channels. As communication engineers, whenever we want to improve on this physical level, we often encounter increasing costs, which is not something we want. Because sometimes the cost is too great to justify. So what does information theory does? It gives you a system solution instead of a physical solution. Because sometimes this is infeasible because of the overhead, the cost overhead. Information theory and coding theory offer an alternative, much more exciting approach. That's interesting. Okay, we accept the given noisy channel. We just accept our do as a noisy channel and add communication systems to it so that we can detect and correct the errors produced by the channel. So let's understand the statement. If you look at the communication channel, what exactly you're looking at is you have a transmitter, you have a channel, you have a receiver, and you send bits into this transmitter, and you should receive hopefully the same bits. Now, what are they saying? They're saying, let's actually give extra modules before we put it in the transmitter, the eventual last link in the system for communication. Let's call it com like this. This is communication modules, and then send it to the transmitter, and then put it over the channel, and then receive, then put it again into the communication module, and then get the bits. This extra thing should fix our problem, hopefully. That's called adding an encoder before the channel, a decoder after it. The encoder encodes the source message into a transmitted message, adding redundancy to the original message in some way. The channel adds noise to the transmitted message, yielding a received message R. The decoder uses the known redundancy introduced by the encoding system to infer both the original message signal S and the added noise. Okay, so what is this saying? Instead of S, T, and all these variables, let's actually create an example. I like learning through an example. So let's do that. First, we have S. I'm gonna just create a message S, which is a stream of bits, 4 bits. And then we want to add redundancy. What is redundancy? What does that mean? It's repetition. So adding repetition can be analogous to saying that, let's say you are talking to someone or you're teaching someone something and he doesn't understand from the first go. So you repeat it, doesn't understand from the second go. You repeat it again and again and again until he gets it, he or she gets it. So that's repetition. It works in real life. I mean, that's not a really nice way to teach someone to repeat again and again the same thing that you just said. Maybe not the best way. There are other ways, which actually also are analogous to better coding schemes than what I'm just gonna tell you now. So there's redundancy, this repetition. You say that, okay, let's repeat every bit. So if we have 0 as our source message, we actually send, instead of just 1 0, let's send 3 zeros. And instead of 1 1, let's send 3 ones. And so now what is our transmitted message that encodes the source message S into a transmitted message? So after encoding, what happens here? This is the encoder. You get 0 0 0, which represents 0, 1 1 1, 0 0. Oh, let me 1 1 1 to represent the other one, and 0 0 0. Okay, so that's S. This is T. This is what we're going to transmit. And then this is what's going to go over the channel. So let's say the channel adds noise. And this noise, what it does is what we receive in R, not the same stream of bits, because noise somehow destroyed that. Okay, let me just create some sort of block here. Okay. Just to differentiate between the channel and the receiver and transmitter block. This is transmitting, this is receiving. Okay, the receiver, let's say it actually gets this as an answer. Let's keep everything the same. So we have just one error, which is in here. This one is an error. Okay, so this is an error. We know this is an error. Now, how does the receiver know? Like, we know because we saw the transmitter, we saw the received signal, we know what, like, how to just see it. The receiver doesn't know the transmitted signal. It just sees this, but it can still know where the error is and correct it. How? It will see 3 bits at a time. So let's see the first 3 bits. 100. At the first go, it knows there's an error. Receiver knows there's an error. But why does it know? Let's look closely. You have 100. We know that every 3 bits that you look at in a window should be exactly the same, either all zeros or all ones. In this case, we have 1 bit that's not zero, not all of them are zeros, and not all of them are ones. You know there's an error. Then you say, how many votes are for zero? Votes for zero is how many zeros you have in this stream of bits is 2. But votes for 1 is just 1. You only have 1 bit that is 1. So that's the number of votes for 1. And then say by majority, because of majority rules in these cases, that actually this 1 should be flipped into 0, and that's where the error happened. So you detected the error and flipped it. Flipping is really easy. Flipping is just you take a 1 to a 0 once you know that it's an error, or a 0 to a 1 once you know it's an error. But detecting an error, localizing the error in a stream of bits, that's the hard part. Okay. So what we just talked about is, yeah, so finally what you get as an answer is the S hat, which is 0001111110000, which is actually the same. Oh, actually, that's not what you get. You see the majority is 0. So you're going to say the first 3 bits actually give you an information bit 0. The second 3 bits actually give you information of 1. The third 3 bits give you information of 1. And the fourth 3 bits give you an information bit of 0. So that's your decoded signal. So you'll see that it's actually exactly the same as the source signal, even though there was an error in the message. That's here, the error correcting codes for the binary symmetric channel. Whereas physical solutions give incremental channel improvements only at an ever-increasing cost, system solutions can turn noisy channels into reliable communication channels with only cost being a computational requirement at the encoder and decoder. So what you realize here, it's just that this added encoder and decoder, it does something. It either increases the time that you have to send this certain information over this channel, and it also increases the computational part, the complexity, computational complexity. Now, defining information theory, what is it? It's concerned with the theoretical limitations and potentials of such systems. What is the best error correcting performance we could achieve? I mean, that's something to think about, because you can have a lot of different encoders and decoders, but how to know whether, like, which one is the best, how to choose for a particular channel, because this is just one type of channel. This is a binary symmetric channel, could be perhaps the easiest one to think about. Then you have coding theory. Coding theory is different in that it's creating these practical encoding and decoding schemes. So whoever is interested by like studying with me this book, you're either gonna go into this information theory, you're gonna talk about a lot of limits and achieving capacity and all that, or coding theory, which is just very interesting also, and it has a lot of practical use in real life. And if you can create a really good practical encoding and decoding scheme, then you'll become very famous in the information theory world. Okay, so that's it for today's session. I hope that we've learned a lot, and see you next time.